don't follow the trend. Right? The trend is there, people jump on the bandwagon, and it's a process. As technology improves and as technology moves on, things will improve as well, and AI is one of them. But it just seems to be the buzzword at the moment. I'm working with AI. In our industry, it was immunotherapy, it was cell therapy. Let's say 8 or 10 years ago, everybody suddenly was in cell therapy, everybody was immunotherapy. But effectively, all these projects which were so-called exciting projects, they jumped off because they weren't really, and everybody uses the word AI, for example.
Hello and welcome to Let's Talk About Tech. It's my great pleasure to introduce you today in this episode to a very famous man from the biotech industry, Peter Llewellyn-Davies. Great to have you, Peter.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Peter, you had such a crazy career from banking, finance to biotech. How did all of that evolve? How did your transition come about from banking into biotech?
Well, it's not like morphing from a caterpillar to a butterfly, not quite that. Thank you very much for quoting me as a famous person. There are many famous people in this world. But effectively, it was all a matter of adaptation. So originally, I started out as a banker, because I wanted to be a helicopter pilot. And that was just a parking position until I actually went through the interviews. So I waited for 5 years until I got a place at an interview for the British Marines as a helicopter pilot. But by that time, I was fully encapsulated in my career in banking. So that's how I ended up as a banker. And then I switched to finance, usually because you switch to the dark side sometime in your career, meaning from a banker to the CFO role, or let's say to a finance role. And then through that, going through various career changes, I came to biotech by pure coincidence. An investment company asked me if I wanted to be an interim CFO of a biotech company who was just going through an IPO. And to be honest, biotech was so far away from me because I wasn't very good in biology. As a matter of fact, I tried to falsify my report from school because I was so bad in biology at the time. Whoops, I've said that now, so it's online. But effectively, I picked up biology later, and becoming a CFO of a biotech company was something totally different, something totally unrealistic, because what kind of business model doesn't want to achieve profit at the short term? It's totally different from anything I'd worked in the past. So biotech for me was fascinating for two reasons. Number one, biotech is something absolutely irrational for a normal banker or a normal person who thinks about investment returns. And secondly, I had personal issues in respect of cancer. Everybody knows someone who's had cancer or has had cancer themselves. So for me personally, it was also a thought that I could do something to help mankind in the long term. So really, that's why I encompassed the idea of going to a biotech company in the end.
Great. And you have worked on many, many places on Earth, right? On different continents. How did your multicultural experience affect your day-to-day business, in business development, in leading your teams? What were your learnings from your international career?
Yes, that's a very interesting question, because there is no particular way of doing this. It's just a matter of trial and error in many cases. But one thing I have learned is always consider what the party you're talking to is thinking about. So, for example, I went to Japan for a negotiation with a Japanese company, and we went through all the motions, the usual business due diligence discussions, etc. And it was quite a good meeting. There were translators there. And in the end, guess where we went for a meal? To a European restaurant. Because they wanted to try and encompass what we were thinking. Mm-hmm. And we were trying to encompass as much as what they were thinking. So in the end, they were in exactly the same position as we were. They were trying to be European, and we were trying to be Japanese in our behavior. And in the end, we found out that most of the people we were talking to had European education as well. So no matter how much homework you do, it's always good to understand the culture you're dealing with. For example, in Brazil, when we were also negotiating for a contract, it was a family-owned business. And the family was the most important thing for these people. So you had to be very sensitive about how you did these things, not as a typical European. At the time I was in Germany, typical German business person who wanted to do something, and they were worried that we would be too hard. right? And they just wanted the deal because they wanted a good harbor for their business. So it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about anything else. And we came with a bunch of lawyers, and they immediately went through all the risks, all the risks, all that. And in the end, the deal almost collapsed because of it, because in the end, it was just about them thinking that the company was in a good place and us thinking it was a good company without that many risks. So, sometimes you have to, it's not just about cultures, it's just about how you treat the person who's on the other side of the table.
So psychology is a big component in your negotiations.
Yes, very much so, because you even if you put your foot in it by saying the wrong things, or you not behaving properly, your table manners are not correct in the culture you're going to, or as a typical thing for me, for example, as a Brit, I always hold the door open for the lady when you go into a restaurant. In Germany or in Austria, it's the other way around. The man goes first. And I understood later to check whether everything is okay in the restaurant, and then you let the lady go first. So it's an unusual thing, and you just have to adjust and adapt according to where you are.
And just be open, right, and learn.
Exactly. And in the end, I think also there's a lot of importance in just having a drink or meal before the negotiations, or let's say meeting up for a casual get together with the teams, and then make sure everybody knows each other, and not just go straight into the difficult parts of negotiating a business deal.
That's a very valuable advice. Biotech is, and you touched this in the first answer, biotech is much different from any other tech and innovation sectors, right? In terms of the time span needed, how long it takes to get into revenues. How would you explain the differences, and how do you deal with these challenges? You're an investor yourself.
Yes, biotech is value creation. Mm-hmm. That's the proper term, I would call it. It's not income creation, it's value creation. So, for example, to give you an idea, biotech starts with some sort of invention, or let's call it invention. It starts with an idea. Someone thinks about how to solve a problem to mankind. Let's say, for example, I want to conquer cancer. Yeah. And how do I do that? There are various approaches. We're way more advanced now than we were 50 or 60 years ago, because we know a lot more about cancers. We know a lot more about the genetic modality of the human body. And we know a lot more about why cancers actually occur. It's health on the one side, but it's genetic on the other side. But there are also things that happen in the body. Everybody has cancer cells, but these are usually killed off by the immune system. So the immune system plays a very important role. Mm-hmm. So because of that, you have the idea that if you improve the immune system, you can conquer cancer. But there are so many ways of doing this. So if you have an idea and say, right, I'd like to improve the way the immune system works, how would I go about this? What kind of product would I have in the end? And then an investor comes along and says, yes, if you invest this amount of money, then this product could come out in the end. And this process could take 10, 15, even 20 years until it gets to be a product. But once it's a product, I always like to quote an example of BioNTech, who didn't exist in 2008. They founded the company with investors, and these investors the money was put into the development of vaccines, for example, cancer vaccines, but it was also later used to treat COVID, or let's say a COVID vaccine. And then the company was worth, I don't know, $70, $80 billion. So there was a high return for investors based on a drug that didn't exist a few years ago. So that's really the idea of biotech. A company may not be profitable, but that's not what the company is doing. It's not there to make money at the beginning. It's there to realize value at the end of its process.
And how does the investor landscape look like? Are there many risk takers that are willing to take on this value creation journey?
There are, but not so many, sadly, in Central Europe. I always like to quote an example, because in our industry, people say we have to go to the United States to get investments, because in the US, for example, there are possibilities for, let's say, investment funds and let's say pension funds and insurances. They invest their money in a broad field of investments. And there are some, like biotech, which are high risk but high return. Mm-hmm. So no risk, no fun is the term, but no risk, no return. And that's why one of the most famous economists who won the Nobel Prize for economy in the 50s, he said, you need your portfolio to have at least 10% high risk investments to be able to achieve an investment. Right? That happens in the US. That doesn't happen so much here. The high risk is considered, let's say, other factors, but not biotech as much as it should be.
If anybody is interested in investing in that space, we're putting up a number of different funds and are actually also exploring in the biotech and life science field. So if you're here watching, just reach out. As a qualified investor, you might be able to participate. We try to attract more money in Europe, right? And try also to move the needle, which brings me to my last question of today. Artificial intelligence, the foundations of that mathematically were actually evolving out of the German-speaking Europe, right? Then this took a fast track with ChatGPT, and literally all industries are now talking about AI. What are the biggest trends that you see in biotech today, and what is the influx of artificial intelligence in your space?
Well, as you say, artificial intelligence has been around for a long time. And this currently I see as a trend. Mm-hmm. And one of my personal modes is don't follow the trend. Right? The trend is there. People jump on the bandwagon, and it's a process. As technology improves and as technology moves on, things will improve as well. And AI is one of them. But it just seems to be the buzzword at the moment. I'm working with AI. In our industry, it was immunotherapy, it was cell therapy, let's say 8 or 10 years ago, buzzwords that everybody suddenly was in cell therapy, everybody was immunotherapy. But effectively, all these projects which were so-called let's say, exciting projects, they jumped off because they weren't really. And everybody uses the word AI, for example. AI, for me, is a normal process of evolution. In our industry, it will help a lot in predicting things. It will help a lot for simulating, let's say, how a product could work in humans. But in the end, it won't, right, that quickly. Mm-hmm. It might do one day, but at this moment in time, it's just a dream because we still need to test our drugs on humans. Right. We still need to test to see whether side effects actually occur, because I don't think anybody now would take the risk of taking a drug which was only tested on computers or, let's say, based on artificial intelligence. This might happen one day, I'm sure, but for let's say in our industry, it will take a while. We will use AI more and more in pre-testing products. Mm-hmm. That is based on statistical relevances, whether to see whether this product has the capability of becoming later first a project, then a product, or whether in fact it is a viable project. Let's say many of our projects, when we start them, we don't know how much it will cost in the end because we don't know of the complications along the way. So if we had a situation where we can calculate the manufacturing costs for the drug, the plants, for example, to make sure that the manufacturing takes place, on all the predefined factors, clinical trials, etc., that they are calculated in front so that we know how much can we ask for this drug, how much can the drug actually achieve, because the investment, as you know, goes into tens of millions or hundreds of millions before the drug is approved.
Clearly. And in artificial intelligence, I do agree, right? When there is a trend, when there is a buzzword out, also multiple skyrockets. So also for investors, it becomes quite expensive to jump on that train. Now, what we see is a lack in compute power, right? And there's too much energy that is consumed by the computing solutions we have at the moment. I mean, right now, we're basically using graphical chips, right, to use them on artificial intelligence operations, which is not quite efficient. There's new technologies arising. One of our companies, as you mentioned, the immune system, Biome Diagnostics, is working in that space. And what I found different to other solutions in classical software as a service markets where people are dealing with AI as well, is that they have really big data in biotech, right? So one stool probe, genetically analysis from the bacteria, is 4 gigabytes of data, right? And to process 4 gigabytes of data, that needs a lot of computing power because that's actually real big data. How far are we actually in the knowledge about our body and the genetics? Is there a limitation on computing power?
Yes, absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. Computing power is a limitation, but also the data is a limitation. Why? Well, let's say there's always the saying, the US innovates, China imitates, or the Far East imitates, and Europe regulates. That is a saying that I've heard many times on my investment searches. And the reason being is that we have so many data protection regulations in Europe in particular, and also patient data regulations. And I think this is not just Europe, this is just a saying, but I think that once we are in a position to take more data from patients, then we will have more data which we can work on. At this moment in time, it's very difficult to get sufficient data which can be used for calculating this information. So that's one step we need to take. The next step, the computer capacity, of course, and the chips. But on the next space will have to be which data can be used. For example, in our clinical trials, we have to be very specific how long we can take data from the patients after the trial, and what kind of data. And let's say, as you might know yourself, once a patient has had the disease, and the follow-up of this disease is always very difficult because the patient may be cured, may be healthy again, and doesn't want to come into the clinic to have a follow-up. So you don't know, does the disease come back? And you lose track. So I think data has limited information capacity until we have a solution how to track long-term involvement of these patients and all of this information.
Also, you need to have a healthy cohort, right? Otherwise, you cannot map, right, a disease and can distinguish between a disease and a healthy cohort.
Yes.
Persons. Yeah. Very interesting. So we will see you in the near future in your field as an investor, maybe again as an entrepreneur.
Always happening.
Okay, so maybe as an entrepreneur and maybe with some touch points to artificial intelligence. Yeah. It was great having you, Peter. I hope you guys got curious. Please look up Peter Llewellyn-Davies. He does a lot of things and has an amazing track record. I'm sure he will appreciate if you reach out to him and connect via LinkedIn. And yeah, we hope to have inspired you. Please subscribe to our channel and tune in for the next episode.